Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Dynasty Underdog. I'm your host, Uriah with me tonight, Daily Demon. How's it going, bud?
It's going good. Good. I'm doing a little better than last week. I feel like I was super tired for that episode, even though it was a great episode. But nuts. This one should be fun, man. We're talking about some data we've talked about before on here, something I
Yes.
track year to year. So, it's small sample size, but the nature of kind of what we're even looking at is always going to be kind of a small sample size, but it's interesting nonetheless. And I think it'll help us talk about some of the players from last year and how we feel about them this year. So yeah, that's exciting. But before we do that, we have plenty of news, some team signings and whatnot.
Yeah. So let's hop into some news and nonsense, which is good that we have a little bit here. Well, see if it matters or not. But yeah, we have Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb got signed to Houston. On top of that, I just found out, I think it was Graham Barfield, but he actually put out, or I guess retweeted an article mentioning that Joe Mixon hasn't practiced yet this year and that he was recently out of a boot. And that was news to me because I never heard he got surgery, was in a boot, or any of that other stuff. So, I mean, on top of the excitement of just like everybody loves Nick Chubb, regardless of probably realistically like what he's capable of now. This kind of, I think, adds a little extra fire to this signing. Again, Nick Chubb goes to Houston.
Yeah. I guess I'm not so worried about Mixon, like probably some minor offseason cleanup or just, offseason injury, getting over that. I'm assuming it's cleanup. I actually didn't really look into that. Probably should. But I wouldn't be so concerned about that, even though like age-wise, like he's definitely prone to, to get an injury. Would not be surprised, though Nick Chubb is, not a young spry fellow either. So, it's not like he doesn't have injury risk of his own. But I think, short term, it's just kind of gonna force Woody Marks further down the depth chart, probably short term. So if you are interested in Marks, you may be able to get a little discount on him. Even past what was he, like a 4th-round pick. So you may be able to find a really easy way to acquire a Woody Marks if you're still interested in him. I'm still just kind of interested in Mixon, and I don't know, man. I can't. Too many injuries with Chubb, and I mean it's a good offense for him though, so I'm sure he'll have some utilization from an NFL perspective, but probably not fantasy. And I don't think it'll impact things too much from a fantasy perspective. I think you're muted. I think you're muted. I can't hear you.
How about now?
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, okay,
You
cool.
learned
Yeah.
you learned how
So
to work it.
I'm not gonna do the hand animation this time. Like I tried it twice, and now I'm just gonna go into it. My bad. Yeah, Aaron Rodgers though he official signs with the Steelers, which I think that we've probably known was gonna happen for a while now, but the media likes to do stuff. So DK Metcalf has a quarterback. I don't know what kind of quarterback he's going to be going forward, but this gives you an opportunity, I think, to either get a starting quarterback for cheap in Superflex or sell one off that you may not have been able to a while ago. So how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, I was just kind of surprised by the money aspect. Definitely not a lot of confidence in that contract, if you ask me. But I mean, it's the best you're going to get. If they were going forward with what Mason Rudolph
Mason
and
Rudolph?
co. Yeah, so
Yeah.
like obviously it's an upgrade from just like a IQ and experience perspective. We'll see if physically he can get it done. I think what you did, which we may be talking about later. Yeah, we'll probably be talking about later. But you moved on from him, from Aaron Rodgers, for a 2nd-round pick kind of thing. And I think if you can just get out from under these kind of assets at this point, this is the kind of news that's going to get it, push it across the finish line. So that I like that kind of move for it. I don't have super high hopes for him here. And all you can do is hope that it helps kind of like Caleb Johnson and the others around kind of develop and perform as well as they can given the quarterback situation. So like I said, the best they could do, I think. How about you?
Yes.
You think this is going to end up successful with Aaron Rodgers?
Um, you know, I think so. I mean, I don't know what your definition of success is. I don't think that Mike Tomlin's going to lose his winning season streak with Aaron Rodgers. If Aaron Rodgers plays 15 games, like I think they'll get 8 wins at least. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about the rest of the team, offensive line, and all those other things that might go into it, or how maybe Aaron possibly might butt heads with Tomlin. But I think at this point, I think they kind of know the roles, so we'll see. Cautiously optimistic, just because. All right, next one. This one is absolutely devastating social media today, but J.K. Dobbins goes to Denver. How do you feel about this for RJ Harvey and Dobbins and Denver?
I kind of dig the fit, to be honest. I mean, if RJ Harvey's as good as everybody thinks he is, I don't think Dobbins at this stage of his career with all the injuries is going to really impede that. However, I do take a little bit of issue with like everybody saying Dobbins sucked last year. I think that he was not like he wasn't amazing by any means. He was a pretty effective rusher on limited carries, but he was actually really good in the passing game. And I think that's where he's going to have some impact here. So I could see him kind of pushing like the Jaleel McLaughlin and whoever else is there, Audric Estime and those kind of guys aside, and really being kind of, the 1B to the RJ Harvey 1A is kind of how I would assume this is going to go. But I definitely think that, they needed some extra padding in that running back room. And this definitely helps. I like Dobbins, especially if he's not going to have to carry the load like he did in, LA, where he's going to be able to kind of, be more of a complementary piece to Harvey. I think that'll really suit him in terms of being efficient, right? Because he was pretty efficient, but it was when he had to take on more carries, and then he ended up getting injured in week 12 or something, and that killed his entire season, obviously. So the fewer carries, I think the better for him, to be honest.
Yeah. And he'll be like at least another year removed from an actual season-ending injury. So
that's true.
And he's still, I don't know. I shouldn't say young, but he's not like old. So I read
before
it
we move here.
So then we.
Sorry, go ahead. I thought you were going to move on. What did you say?
I was going to move on, but I was going to say I read the whole Dobbins thing kind of the same as you.
Okay, good. 2 things here. Just there was actually a question in the comments, but before that, rookie move on the mute button, brother. But we got Isaiah here. I got Harvey and a 26th third for Coleman, Monty, Pat Bryant, and a 26th fourth. What do you guys think of that move? And a third, Harvey and a third. Yeah, I mean, I think that's fine for Harvey and a third. I mean, I don't know, Monty and Coleman maybe have more market value split up, but like I think that's fine. You probably got into the better piece.
Yeah, I think it's probably fine. You got a third back. I definitely would have been interested in seeing what year 2 Coleman kind of looks like before moving off of him, but I don't blame you. A lot of people really high on RJ Harvey, and I think that's just the price you have to pay anyway if you also want to get on it. So I don't think nothing egregious.
Yeah. I mean, with people paying, the 106 for Harvey, like in drafts, like drafting him there, like this is probably much cheaper than that if we're being honest, even though Coleman was kind of, a fringe first round pick probably last year, in Dynasty, in rookie drafts. But that said, yeah, like that's what I was saying. You could probably maybe split Coleman and Monty into potentially more value. But again, I think this might do the trick. So I dig it. I dig that. And then he also says he got Dobbins for a fourth in another league, and that's a smash. I think
smash.
Yeah.
Auto accept.
Easy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So then the 2 other ones, I have it just here with a little question mark, but like James Cook, hold out. He is at camp technically. Says he does want to lose out on money. Terry McLaurin also is holding out. Do we care? Does it matter? I think the Dynasty community is too smart to actually have any actionable advice here. Like, I think we all realize that James Cook is probably going to play week 1. And Terry McLaurin is probably also going to play week 1. These deals will most likely get done. I think only in recent history I can think of is Le'Veon Bell was the only one that actually set out a whole season, right? So I don't know. Do you think you could take advantage of this news? Do you think that people are
Mm.
panicking on this?
I don't even know if there's really much to take advantage of. Like maybe on Terry, but I don't think so. I think everybody kind of knows how good of a relationship he has
Yeah.
with Jaden, and so I'd find it hard to believe that they wouldn't get that done. For Cook, I think interestingly enough, his value kind of was taking a dip in general. Like people kind of realizing that his season last year was really held up by touchdowns, and that might not be sustainable. Plus, year two, maybe Ray Davis taking a little bit more work. Who knows? Really, there's definitely some doubt with James Cook. Obviously, a more limited player, so I think people want to get out of him anyway. And so, yeah, like I don't know, like you said, the community is kind of too smart for this. He showed up at camp. I think that kind of kills it. You know what I mean? Like once he shows up at camp and he's there, it's like he's there. He's going to be
He's
there.
not in
It's a
Cabo.
good team.
Yeah.
He's on a good team. Like, what is he really going to do? Is he not going to play? And are they going to move on from him? Probably not. So not really concerned here. But if I could move on, see, the thing is I think most people want to move on from James Cook, and his value maybe was taking a little extra dip on this, and you're like, well, I'll just wait, So I think that's kind of how I feel about it.
Cool. All right. Like we did last week, we had a little bit of data stuff from Billy, and he hooked us up and blessed us with some tight end information this week. He has, which is something that we've gone over, I think.
Running back information. Tight end was last week.
Yeah, this week, running back information. Yes. Something I think that has been proven by Billy multiple years now in a row, but like we kind of bring it back, and it's just something to be aware of. So, what do you got for us, bud?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's proven. Again, like this is limited data because again, we're looking back until I'll share my screen in a second to kind of show some stuff, but we're looking back really until 2010. So the further back we go, maybe we see some different things, but obviously we're trying to capture more recent usage and kind of the landscape we're working with. And so when I say limited, we're looking at 300 plus rush attempt carriers, and so there's not that many of them anyway. You know what I mean? Yeah. From year to year, you could yes. only, there may be two, there may be three, and on like a really good year, there's like 5 or 6. On a good year, I mean, on a year where there's a lot, there's like 5, 6, 7 at most, really, in the past decade, 13 years or so, we should say. So, like anything we're taking away from what we're looking at here does have to, at least come with that disclaimer, I think. But the idea is for me kind of to think about what does the production, the efficiency kind of look like in the year following a year where a running back carried the ball 300 or more times, right? And it sounds like kind of an arbitrary number, but I think, that like 18 to 20 carry total in, per game is kind of a really hard, really challenging thing to sustain over over a season, right? And maybe that gets adjusted as like we add games to the season. We're at 17 game, whatever season at this point. So maybe over time, we adjust to that because obviously, we're looking back in years with lesser games, probably just a few. But that said, the idea again is to kind of just test efficiency on the following year. So we're looking at, I'll throw up the screen here so we can kind of just show what we're talking about, and I'll try to speak it into. Let me make this a little bit cleaner. Try to speak to everything for the just the podcast listeners, but. So I have here is a graph with or a table, and on the bottom here, this is just interesting because we were talking about it in the Discord. On the bottom here, I have just a count of the 300 plus rush attempt seasons like per year. So going back to 2010, there was 7, and then 2, 5, and then a big kind of dip where there was 2 or 1 from 2013 into 2021, 2022. We have 3. Last year 0, and then it jumped up to 6 in 2024, which is a massive jump, which is kind of interesting when we're talking about, are we going away from the like workhorse running back? And, I don't think that having a 6 300 plus attempt rushers in one season says that we're going back to having a workhorse running back. I'd guess that it has a lot more to do with how defenses are playing, kind of probably playing back a little bit more for the two high shells, those kind of things where, they're giving up a lot of space on the front end of things and trying to stop the big plays. So I'm assuming that it has something to do with that. But we'll get into more of 2024 in a couple minutes here. So I'll just move this down so we're not distracted by it. Scroll up here. Okay, so we have a table here, pivot table here, essentially, that's just looking at on average for the entire population of these players, which is, I think it's 25 players now. And it's looking at the average points per game difference. So if I'm looking at the points per game from the season after the 300 plus carries, and then we're subtracting, those points per game from the 300 plus carry season to kind of just see, is there an increase or decrease in points per game from one season to the next? And so we have the average points per game difference, average missed tackle force difference, breakaway runs, yards per contact after attempt, yards per carry, average yards, and average attempts. And so every single category across the board is negative for the entire population. And again, it's limited sample, so I do think that it's maybe instructive to kind of like drill down into some specific examples and like see what actual like specific players look like in certain years, just to kind of see what that is, so we can see like who's weighing what down and who actually is, performing the year after, if there are any. But on a whole, there is a -3 points per game difference in the year following, -15% difference in missed tackles forced, -7 on the breakaway runs, yards after contact per attempt, -300 on average. The attempts in general down like 100 on average. Yards in general down about 500 on average. Yards per carry not down much, but down half a yard really, I guess, on average. But just in general, the season after a 300 plus carry season has not been favorable for that running back. I'm going to drill into some specific players, but while I'm doing that, Uriah, why don't you just give some general thoughts maybe on what we're seeing here? And you might be muted again.
My bad, I was muted. So, to me, it's pretty stark. You're looking at 15.3% less missed tackle force. That's just showing you that's wiggle, right? The average attempt difference was like 100 attempts. Okay, so now what we could do, if we want to do like even more thorough study, my guess is my head is just going, how are you going from an offense that's given a running back 300 carries, and then the next year that running back's going to have 100 less carries? My intuition is saying that motherfucker got hurt, right? I'm kind of assuming like, why would you just suddenly potentially, right? That may not be the case, but that's what I'm thinking in my head, which would make a lot of sense. Like, you could only sustain getting tackled, because every time a running back gets the ball in his hand, he's getting tackled. He's getting tackled by multiple people, and it hurts. And you can only do that so long for so long. And it's just pretty stark that you don't see anything that's not, in my opinion, what I would kind of consider significant. I think these are significant numbers. I think that losing 3 points per game, 3.2 points per game matters over a 17-week period. I think that 15.3% less missed tackles matters, because you're getting tackled 15% more often, right? Which leads to injuries and other things like that. Like, I think all these numbers aren't very small. Like, I don't think it's a small difference. I think that this is pretty telling, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. I think it's worth. I actually have this filter here for players who I think it was less than. I got to look at the filter for it, but I think it was maybe less than 12 games. So I was pretty generous actually for the injured versus full season. But even if we just keep it for players who were, Jesus Christ, in for full seasons, let's see, just make sure. Yeah, okay, you're right though. There is a pretty significant difference in the number of attempts, right? So you're getting it's really 50 attempts on average, and then you're getting -2 instead of -3. So if we get rid of the players who are injured, we do see I think it's a substantial difference, but still, to your
Still a
point, I think
substantial
this is
difference, yeah.
significant. Still significant, right? You're seeing, still -2 points per game difference, -7% on the missed tackle forced.
Yards after contact is still about half. Like,
300. Yeah, exactly. So, but that is actually a fairly big rise, especially in the attempts. I mean, that cuts it in half. So that's worth putting there. So let me just unfilter that for a second. Let's go ahead and look at, I mean, Derrick Henry is kind of, the
unicorn?
exception to the rule. Yeah, he kind of is
Yeah.
the exception to the rule. So, I mean, even for him, I think it's worth looking at and just kind of seeing, what we have here. So on a whole, kind of the same thing as your average, right? Like it's kind of the same thing as your average for players who are. Let me actually make sure. Hold on. I just want to make sure that this was right. Okay, that was right. All right. So then, if we're looking at Derrick Henry, yep, about the same as the average for players who are healthy. So let's go ahead and look at 2023. Okay. The year following his 2022 season. Just big hit. And if we go and look, let's see, just to confirm, Derrick Henry. Do we know games played on this? I wanted to see games played. I guess I hit it. I want to know how many. Oh, no. Here we go. So he played 16 games that season. I just wanted to confirm that. But nonetheless, a pretty big dip in performance that following year. He did actually break the mold from the breakaway run percentage. That actually increased slightly, which is good to see, but it didn't really impact the rest of the numbers very much. And so even for this kind of player who's just an animal, you kind of see that dip in performance. But what I do think is interesting, so let's go look at another player from that same year. Let's go look at Josh Jacobs, right? So Josh Jacobs, look at 2023. Okay, so here, similar thing, right? It's pretty big dip in performance. But what was interesting about Josh Jacobs, if you go and look at the season after this, right, which was this past year, he ended up having another 300-yard season. But it just seems though like the year after one, it's hard to maintain all of that work year over year, and then maybe after a year of kind of having to take a step back, not performing as well, you can maybe regain some of that steam.
You got one more left in you.
Yeah, it's not even just him though; it's also Derrick Henry, right? Who
yes.
In the past also, if we go back to Derrick Henry, okay. And we go back to 2021, which this was the season where he really defied all the odds, right? He actually increased his points per game in this year +1 season. And then 2020, let's look at this one as well. So those negatives. So it's just 2021, right? 2022, or so I'm sorry, 2020. And then 2021, he had another year, if I'm not mistaken. So let's just look at that real quick in here. 2021. Yeah. Okay. And so he did have the 300 plus carries there, and then also in 2022. So that's the year he basically defied the odds, right? Where from 2021 to 2022, he was able to kind of increase his points per game. And then after that, it kind of fell apart. He obviously got injured, and then he was able to come back and do it again. So it does seem like when there is kind of a year in between where it's either under, a down performance or an injury where you kind of just can't use your body, there is kind of a potential resurgence. So I just think what's really interesting is that on the whole, as you look at this, there is just across the board a dip in performance the year following that 300 plus carry season. So so let's just kind of, we can go around and around and around and look at all these different players. Obviously, I'm going to definitely share this with the Discord so everybody can kind of go ahead and make a copy of this, play with it. It's pretty fun to look at. You can do whatever you want with it. But I think it's worth kind of looking at, as we said, we had 6 rushers last year, over 300 attempts, the most we've had since 2011, or I'm sorry, 2010 rather, which is crazy. And if you look back, just for fun, Arian Foster, Cedric Benson, Chris Johnson, Michael Turner, Rashad Mendenhall, Ray Rice, and Steven Jackson back in 2010. Yeah. That was the list.
What a group.
Yeah, it's guys you would not think about. And also, sorry, Michael Turner had 2 300-plus yard seasons or carry seasons. I don't think anybody would have had that one on their bingo card. But go ahead, Uriah. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think that the resurgence we saw last year definitely, I think, has to do with the defense. What we saw early on, I think everyone playing any type of fantasy was feeling it for like 6 weeks, where like the passing just wasn't there. Like quarterbacks all across the board, tight ends across the board were just kind of not doing what we were hoping them to do, because defenses were playing the too high safety, which means just run through a dude's face. And so I think little cat and mouse there between offense and defense. I think it kind of played out for us in real time last year, which is fair enough. Fun part of football.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about these guys from last year, right? So we have 6 of them. We have Bijan Robinson. We have Derrick Henry again. This guy, he's on this list so much, dude. Again, he had that down season 2023, I think injury related. And then you have 2024 resurgence. So it's just kind of a little bit of a pattern there, but whatever. So we have Bijan Robinson, Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, Kyron Williams, and Saquon Barkley. And honestly, like, I didn't remember Kyron Williams having 300 touches. I didn't remember carries. I didn't remember Taylor really having 300, to be honest with you. So I was like, wow, there's some guys in here I did not quite expect. But when we look at this list, and kind of talking about what we've been talking about, I just wonder if we get a little concerned at all for any of these players. So I'm wondering, like, who you might be most worried about from this list heading into 2025 and why.
Easily Josh Jacobs.
Okay.
Because I mean, he's the elder statesman there besides Henry. But I mean, look, Henry's not going to get 300 touches this year. Like he can't do this again, right? But
Henry,
but I'm still I can't. I can say that here. I'm not going to say. I don't know. But yeah, Josh Jacobs, man, it's got to be Josh Jacobs. Like to see that only really Derrick Henry, who treats his body like a temple, was able to hit that mark, dip, come back, hit that mark, and dip. Like, I don't think Josh Jacobs is that dude. So, and I backed it up with a little trade we'll talk about later, but I think on that list I'd be more concerned about him. Jonathan Taylor's still pretty young. Kyron Williams is still slightly young. Saquon also, I don't think he has. It's a little worrisome. It's a little worrisome, I guess, is what I say. But and I think Bijan's good to go, but who knows?
Oh man, I meant to look at Zeke. I think I did. Maybe we can look at Zeke before we get out of here, because it may be instructive for like Bijan, who is one of the few that got this many carries very early on in his career. So he may be like, he may be a little bit safer of an option than typically what we've seen for the following year. Resurgence. But yeah, like I think I agree with you. I think Josh Jacobs is definitely one of the most worrisome. I mean, we also have the data looking at the last time this happened, it dipped pretty significantly, right? Performance wise. So, I mean, there is that, and you don't want to put all the weight into that, but I agree. Age, all the carries, everything is slightly concerning. I mean, Kyron kind of concerns me a little bit, to be honest with you, because just like his stature to take on 300 carries, that had to be a lot for his, him physically, but also they add, Hunter and you have Corum there. And so I just wonder if naturally, this season is going to be kind of a down season for him. But, I could be wrong. Maybe they ride him again. I think Derrick Henry is an interesting one, because we've seen him defy the odds at least once. And so this would be a year where he's kind of, doing that again. Right. And I might have misspoke before, because his 2023 season was actually really good. Not 2022. That was Yeah, I did mistake that. So, or no, I'm sorry. It's 2020. Derrick Henry did have a down season in 2023. Am I not wrong? Am I right about that? Let me see.
24.
Let me make
Well,
sure. I could be getting my shit mixed up talking about all these different dates right now.
I think he got injured at the end of the year.
But that's what I mean, right?
So,
he did he had a 2023. Not necessarily. Yeah, he got injured at the end of the year. He had the 280 carries, right? Okay.
Yeah.
That's what happened. Yeah. I'm just making sure I had my shit straight.
I was in the finals with him, so or I was in the playoffs with him. So.
Yes, I do think you mentioned Barkley. Barkley definitely I think is a candidate to regress. I mean, just the age and I naturally he may still be really good for fantasy, to be honest, and he will be probably really good for fantasy, but just naturally I think just as we see the numbers, it's going to be hard to kind of maintain. So you're going to see a difference in that, and there also may be a natural thing where like they're just the guy had such a crazy workload the year prior. They're determined to not have to do that to him again, you know what I mean, on average for most of these guys. So you're going to see less attempts maybe, but yeah, that could just be naturally part of what we're talking about.
And yeah, I think with the whole Barkley thing was that Barkley was so good last year that I think by any metric he's gonna be less than it was last year, like
right. And again,
it's kind of how it is.
Right. These guys are also like some of the best players too, right? They're going to be scoring some of the most fantasy points most of the time. And so typically, maybe a 2 point per game decrease isn't that bad and brings them closer just to, top 8 than the top 2, running back or whatever it is, top 3 running back. Correct. So again, like we're talking about the elite level here. So again, you got to take some of this with a grain of salt, but I think it's instructive in just understanding the cadence and arc of like how these seasons go. You can kind of plan some of this out and kind of look at, some of this in a trending way. So, I mean, I wonder if there's anything else we want to touch on here before we move on. I guess because I was going to say like who's most likely to beat the case, but I think that's got to be either Henry or Bijan. Yeah.
Maybe Jonathan Taylor, but we'll see. Yeah, also kind of just looking at talent behind them, and well, shoot. Bijan by age and Henry just because he's done it before. Like, bet against him if you want, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, the only other one that's just worth mentioning in general is like Jonathan Taylor. He's kind of taken a dip in dynasty value as well. He's kind of around running back 10. And while there may be some decrease in performance, I still think he's a pretty good bet to be a really solid player. And at that price, I think it may be worth churning, getting a plus by, kind of tearing down from somebody in a similar range or something like that to move into that, even though I think he's just one of these of the group that I'm not worried is going to bust. And I can't tell you is going to like beat the odds necessarily, but is probably just going to be more steady than I am worried about some of these other guys. Those bottom 3, Jacobs, Williams, and Barkley, a little concerning. And I mean, Henry obviously as well, but I just think he's in such a good offense. Even if he gets less carries, he's going to probably score enough touchdowns to make up for those, those points that he would be losing out on. So, yeah, super interesting stuff. I'll obviously add the data for this after the season, and we'll see how it keeps trending out, but it's super fun to look at year over year. And I do think it can be instructive in kind of, situational, kind of like specific, if you're kind of tie breaking stuff and looking at these guys and at this top level who you would rather have, sometimes this can help in that regard, I think.
Cool. Thanks for putting that together.
Yeah, it's always fun. Love digging into the nuances, and it's interesting.
All right, here. Next thing we're going to talk about. It's a good question. And it's like, anyways, is assessing dynasty team needs easy? And I just threw in here like in parentheses, I said no. And there's just like so much into it, man. There's so much into it because probably one of the easiest things you do is go to like Dynasty Daddy and plug in your dynasty teams, and then you can kind of see the strength of what your wide receiver room looks like, what your running back room looks like, and you kind of compare it to the other ones in your league, and you could do all that. But the human side of things, at least for me, and I speak on this, ever since we've really been doing this, just the like my guys type of deal, the hopium, the copium, and all those things. Like I wish I could be stone cold, like I don't know, like Paul Peterson is kind of just like, nope, you're out. No, you're like me. I hold a lot of hope in players. So I think for me, when I'm assessing my team, maybe foolishly or not, I see potential in all the people that I've chosen to roster. Like I don't have a lot of players on my team that are there because it was a good value or because like it just worked out that way, or I don't have a lot of that. Like, and so maybe I played a little different than I guess you probably should, right?
Because you're saying you go for players who you want to roster, right?
For the most part, right? I mean, there are certain ones. Like I got Kyle Pitts in a startup because it's not because I like Kyle Pitts, but it's like the 15th rank or something crazy. I'm like, well, I need a tight end, and I don't necessarily like the guy, but like for the most part, it's like, so when I'm evaluating my rosters, I'm not looking at like a wins over replacement. I'm not looking at value like as much as I should. Like, man, I should really move off this guy because it's probably his highest value and just trade into some other player. I'm like, no, I really like this guy. That's why he's still on my team.
Sure.
And so for me personally, Billy, it's hard for me to properly and unbiasedly assess where my team's at strength-wise, or at least as far as personnel on my roster goes. But I mean, like first looks, I could look at a team and realize like if it's like, slightly competitive or not. But like, I think I probably think my teams are a little bit better than they are because I have players that I like.
That's fair. That's fair. No, totally. I mean, no, that makes a lot of sense. Cause like, I think a real question we have to ask ourselves is like, how honest are we really being, right, with our teams? Cause like, that's gonna definitely lead us down the right path, but it's hard because obviously there's players you like, you believe in. And so you're going to kind of lean into those, right? You want to, who's a good one. Oh my God. I'm trying to remember the first Devy pick that you and I made in that one league.
Washington. UW running back.
Yeah, the new CMC is what he was dubbed. But, it's just funny because like anything like that you kind of like find, and even if they're not doing well, you're like, yeah, maybe it might work out. Right?
So that's my honest answer.
And I think there's.
Do you do just stone cold, just like, nope, you're out, you're cut, you're not making the like, just more.
Yeah, well, and again, I mean, yes, I'm definitely more than you are. I mean, I think there's some like, the endowment effect. We talked about this before, where it's like you like things that you own more than other things, even if they're better. And so like it's these biases that like I really think you have to kind of overcome to effectively evaluate your roster, because I think often we totally overrate our depth or misjudge a timeline. It's exactly what we're talking about, right? We're looking at guys on the back end of our roster, and it's like, should I be keeping Carson Steele on my bench because I just like Carson Steele coming out of college, even though he's absolutely nothing at this point? And it's like there. And again, I've I had to like force myself. I'm like, no, I'm getting rid of this guy. There's this offseason. I was like, no, I got to get rid of this guy. He's like nothing. But it's like I've far too often kept a player like that on my roster, and that's at the low end of it, But when you get to like the higher end, even where it's like your starting roster and you're keeping guys who you believe in too long, it obviously can really impact you. So like, I mean, for me, it's like I'm completely playing the market. I was actually going to ask you, like, how do you evaluate your team needs? Is it like based on your team, or is it based on the market, right? And like, you can answer that, but like for me, I typically try to come out of a startup like in a good place with my team so that I can base my needs on the market in a way, right? Like I try to come out with it, and obviously it's easier said than done. Everybody tries to come out with a decent team, but I tried to really, navigate the startup market to make sure I'm not taking too many chances, still taking some chances on like rookies and stuff where it makes sense, but where I'm like really heading into a direction that is pretty stable from that perspective. And from there, I'm not so worried about, oh, I need a running back. Oh, I needed this or that and the other. I can just basically go, who do I have that is valued very high? And is there a deal worth making that is going to get me, plus on that makes enough sense to do that and kind of play the market from that respect. And when I feel like you can get enough plus in kind of like the draft capital realm, then you create a situation where you can kind of attack your own team needs utilizing that draft capital if you need to, and meaning like selling it for established players, and you don't need to really impact your actual like production, the players on your team where you're like kind of constantly like churning out of that. But that's kind of how like I view assessing my team and kind of what I'm trying to do with it. But there's definitely more to it than that, right? Like, I mean, you can definitely answer that question if you want, but also I'm wondering, like, for you, how do you decide if you're like a contender or retooler or like a rebuilder?
A lot of it's based on last year, right? So I know I had, I had three teams that I know that I was rebuilding, and I successfully either came away with a 101 or 102 in those leagues, probably most rightfully so. And then the other ones, if I made the playoffs, like I assume I'm a contender, there's not a whole lot that's changed on my roster, except for I've added some new rookies. I don't use probably online tools as much as I should. It's, more by vibes, I guess. But, I do it a lot based on what I did last year. And if there's any significant losses, or say I had a middling team, but I also had a lot of guys on IR that are young enough that will come back and actually play. I take those things into account. This actually kind of came up in like a trade offer to me. I believe it was DU5. One of the guys I think was trying to sell me Laporta. And I actually mentioned to him, I was like, like right now I'm not really looking for a tight end. I think my tight end is Kyle Pitts, but I have a bunch of other guys on my roster that are, tight ends. They're guys, right? The thing is, going into that specific league, the choices that I made in that drafted moved down to end up with 2 second-round picks, where I ended up with Brian Thomas Jr. and Puka Nacua. The dilemma I was in was, okay, yeah, I could definitely work a deal to get Laporta, who I believe will be a better tight end for me than Kyle Pitts. As I said, I don't think I need a tight end right now. But technically, I guess I do, because like Kyle Pitts might suck, like really, really suck. But I'm not going to put myself in a position to undo what I purposely did in the startup draft by selecting those 2 second-round wide receivers. Then I'm going to go forward. I'm not going to pay that price to correct a mistake as having Kyle Pitts as my tight end 1. I don't think that's necessary, given having the added firepower at wide receiver that other people did not walk away from in the startup draft that I was able to, even though I wasn't able to secure a top 5 tight end. So some of it, maybe pie in the sky. But I believe, just kind of looking at what I have going, if I don't really have any glaring needs, in my opinion, I'm not looking out to go out there and acquire a certain position like that. Like, it's kind of like word salad, but this one is kind of specific to DU5 for me, where I realized I did not walk away with a top 8 tight end, but I wasn't going to sacrifice kind of the moves I made during the startup to correct that. I think there are a bunch of other different ways I could go about doing that.
That's a great point. Yeah, like it's not always going to, like, there's a lot of ways to kind of fix, your situation, or I guess, not necessarily fixing it, right? But it's just kind of addressing, any given situation and understanding that, like, where you're at, right? Because, I mean, again, if you feel like you are still like a contender, right, with your build or whatever, then you can go ahead and you're going to attack things differently, right? Maybe you can go ahead and, later in the season, find somebody who thought they were going to be contending, who has a decent tight end that you can address it, mid-season and just, pay a fairly reasonable price. If you were looking at that team and going, well, maybe this team's not going to compete, you might not even address the tight end situation at all, right? You might just say, why don't I just break this team down? So it depends on what you're doing too, right? Like it depends on, and that it really helps being able to identify like where you're at to say like what that next move is going to be, because you can pivot actionably, right? You can actually pivot with a purpose, and you can say like, okay, this team is a retooling team. So like I can make XYZ moves to churn out of these old guys into some young guys with upside, so that maybe, next year or, year plus from now, like 2 years, they hit and I'm kind of back in contention, and knowing that you weren't really going to compete that year. So that's kind of the thought. But then if we think back to kind of like, how do you evaluate your team needs? I think that that also kind of has a connection back to whether you're a contender, a retooler, or a rebuilder, right? Because if you're a rebuilder, do your team needs even matter, right? They might not matter at all. Like your team needs may go out the window, and all you care about is market value. You know what I mean? All you should be, and the truth is that's all you should be caring about, is like how much value can you stack, even if it's in like, okay, you moved, 4 or 5 pieces or whatever for Josh Allen, but can you like probably flip Josh Allen for like, much more valuable pieces, but it's 3 pieces instead, you know what I mean, down the road? Or it's like, it's those, or is he just more valuable in general than those pieces, and you just kind of got to ride that wave? But it's the thought process of like, you don't need the wide receivers and running backs anymore at this point, because you're not competing, stack your value into, if you're playing super flex, which we're always talking about here, into a higher, premium asset. And so it really matters, I think, or, it's really important to identify, to be able to kind of look at your team, be honest with yourself, and say, and that's the other thing. Like I like a lot of players, but this is one of the biggest things for me, put it on my social media and all that stuff. It's like unbiased analysis, right? Like I'm doing my very, very best. It comes from the evaluations of these rookies to evaluation of, the vets, the dynasty team, everything, where you go and you look at it and you just are brutally honest with yourself, and you're like, I love this guy, but it's just not it, man. Like you just can't, like, I got to move, you got to kind of be quick about it too. Obviously you're not trying to rush these things, but you have to be decisive, I guess is the right word, be decisive about it and understand like when to jump ship, but you got to be able to, not have that, this is definitely not it. Sunk cost fallacy. That's it. Sunk cost fallacy, right? Where like you paid an emotional price, even. It doesn't even necessarily need to be an expensive price, but you paid an emotional price on like all this time and effort and love into this player. And maybe you overdrafted him in the 3rd round, but it's like at some level, if you can still get something for that player by packaging them with something, you got to be able to see the forest, for the trees, and be able to move past your inherent biases, unfortunately. And it's one of the toughest things in this game to kind of, push down within yourself. It really, really is. And it's, and I think you can separate yourself from others by showing some restraint in that regard. So, okay, cool. Yeah, no, this is really good stuff. I love talking about this. Yeah.
For Uriah, who's too stubborn with his players.
yeah. I mean, not too bad. I mean, you definitely do well, so it's not that bad. But I think it's ramped because, again, you're not the only one doing it. There's definitely at least 8 to 9, and maybe 11 others in most scenarios that have a lot of bias that they're working with too. So it's not like you're the only one doing it. But that's the point: is if you can limit it, then there's a bunch of other people who have, thoughts that don't really matter seeping into their evaluations. And if you can kind of just be one step above, then that makes all the difference, man. It just does. It makes all the difference. And you can take advantage of your league mates in that way. So, okay, great stuff there. I think we can move forward. Got a really quick one here, slight market price board action. So I've been really active in the DU leagues. I have,
you have
out of the five leagues, I have 3 that I would say are pretty solid contenders. I think 2 of them are really good contenders. One of them is kind of more fringy. The other 2, DU1 and 2, really have needed for a long time after I took a title in DU1 to kind of just reshape this team. And so finally coming into, I think the the middle of that process, but really was able to kind of sell off a bunch and stack up some picks there. And then DU2, I've been doing the same, trying to do the same, but it's been a lot harder. And so I've been really playing the market price board. And when we say that, it is kind of, going into your team and on Sleeper especially, and you can do this with the trade bait on MFL as well. But it's basically going in there, changing the player's nickname to something the likes of any second round pick or 2/4 or a third round pick, whatever it is, whatever you're kind of willing to accept for that player, right? And basically with the assumption that you're going to accept for the most part whatever somebody sends over, if it equals what you said, right? So if I put a second round pick for Isaiah Likely, if you send that over, you're going to expect that I accept that, right? If I put a first plus and you just send me a first, I'm not going to accept that. You know what I mean? So it's like, and first plus has a little bit more wiggle room, of course, but then nonetheless, I thought it was interesting because, I hadn't gotten too much action, but you do get some action from this if you're persistent. And if you, do it the right way and you come somewhere close to market, and you can go just a little over, just a little under sometimes, depending on what you're trying to do. This one, I put Isaiah Likely out there for 26. I think I said any second. I think I might have said any second for Isaiah Likely, and I had somebody come in who has a pretty solid team. So I'd say a mid-second, could be even, approaching late for Isaiah Likely, and got it done immediately. Felt good about that. Just in general, of like, I think I have Mark Andrews on this team and just quite a bit of depth, so I didn't really need Likely. Figured I'd diversify a little bit from the team perspective there. And also, I'm not sure his value will ever surpass that. So I don't know. What do you think about that trade, Uriah?
I think it's good. I mean, honestly, I think the return on investment is crazy. I mean, what DU, 2?
2.
Yeah, so you've had him a while. So like you didn't draft him in the startup. So you got him as a rookie pick.
I can check what he is, what I did with him or whatever.
Yeah, look at that. But I'm just going to go ahead and assume that it didn't cost you a second to acquire this guy. I think you're kind of hitting on a peak moment where I believe that people are seeing him as successor to Mark Andrews going forward, which is pretty great. I mean, he's a good player. In a situation where you're trying to rebuild, like if you still have depth at tight end, then I think that probably getting the future second is exactly what you needed. I don't know if you would have got that done if you didn't post it,
exactly
the way you did.
Exactly. Yeah. And I agree with much of what you were saying there. He actually was added to the team. So I've had him since we were over on MFL. I'd have to go back and check, but that makes me think that I got him either off waivers or in like the third or something of that rookie draft. So yeah, I'm happy to kind of just increase around, to a little bit more premium of a pick on a guy who I just think, he might have one of those breakout seasons eventually, but I think he's going to be a much more limited, boom bust kind of player in fantasy. So it's not something I'm like super, intrigued to hold on to. But Uriah, brought up the main point, which was that, using the market price board, changing these names, I might not have gotten this deal done if I'm not either going out and sending a bunch of trades out myself or letting the league know, like, this is my price for the player. And when you're really trying to get things done, get things moving, Jake is a big proponent of this. It's worked out for him plenty. Joe does this a lot. Plenty of our league mates do this and are successful with it. But I think if you are, you don't have to be too rigid with your prices, but if you're fair, you can get stuff done, even if it's sometimes a little over market. Even you can get things done. But I also think that it's a good way to quickly get out of pieces that you don't value very much if you do throw them under market a little bit, right? We've talked about that before too. It's like if a guy is, a late third value and you go for a fourth or 2/4 and you put that on there, you might get a trade done real quickly, And so it depends what you're trying to do, but very, very useful tactic.
Cool. Yeah, just 2 quick things, or maybe just one. Like, in order to get the type of action that you're able to get by posting, "Hey, Likely is available for a second," you would have to actually send out that offer 11 different times.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Or you just go in and edit this, and then 11 people will see that eventually, and they'll be like, "Oh, I didn't even know if I could get Likely for a second." Yeah, smash. Like, you just would never be able to have that same type of outreach in such a short amount of time without doing it that way.
Yep. And you do buy some credit from doing what you say you were going to do, which is trade a
Absolutely.
player for X price, which I think does give you some rep points
Jonathan
for the
Brooks for
future.
a fourth.
Exactly. There you go,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Alrighty.
All right.
Before we move to the last segment here, just the big boy over here, just here to say hello. Looking forward to the episode dropping. Have a good night. Appreciate you for dropping in real quick. I know you're no longer here, but a shout out to the big boy Discord member. Awesome dude.
Yes.
DU5 league mate as well. Yeah, shout out. All right. Trades and non-trades. Let's do it.
Trades and non-trades. Trades. All right. Thanks, Jake, for adding what league these came from. I saw you editing earlier today. Got my eye on you. DU2. So Aaron Rodgers, after the news it broke, he's going to sign. I think it's time. Like, let's see if anybody wants this guy. This is DU2. I'm the same boat as Billy. I'm rebuilding. I don't need Aaron Rodgers this year. I have another share in a different league where I'm contending, and I'm going to keep Rodgers because I need another quarterback. I might use him. But so he in the actual main group chat, he's after I put Rodgers on the block, he said, what's your price? And I said, any second. And that goes out to the whole league. He didn't wait around. Hey, you know what? I don't think you're gonna get that from anybody, so I'm gonna lowball you. He sent me an offer. I countered, and this is what we ended up with, and I think it's fine. So I sent him Aaron Rodgers a 28 third, and I got back at 20. It says 26 second, but it might be 28 second.
I think it's a 28 second. I think.
Yeah.
Why did he put
Anyway,
it like that?
I got a second back. He was trying to get a 27 third off me. I could have haggled, but honestly, I think just the way he plays the game, and as this is not that big a deal to me, I still ended up with a second back, which is kind of what I wanted. I'm more than happy to make this deal.
Yeah, it was a 28 second. I just checked.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think this is fine. I would have liked it to be like a 27 second instead. Just kind of, or like a 26 even, obviously, just because you got to kind of wait for this, and he's getting kind of a piece he can use. But that said, what I said at the beginning of the show kind of travels to here, where it's like I'm not super encouraged about Rodgers in general. Obviously, definitely the best thing that they have over there, but I could definitely see it not going as planned. So you may have gotten out of this for, a second when if you held on longer, you may not get anything for him. So I dig it.
All right. Next one came shortly after this trade. DU2, Russell Wilson for 27 third and a 27 third for 26 seconds. That's what I would have really liked to get done with Rodgers, but I just don't think you're able to get that deal swapping those two quarterbacks.
Yeah, it is fair because obviously Russ is a little bit younger, a little bit less injury riddled. And so you could see him, even with I think people were underwhelmed seeing him with the Steelers last year, but I think even that stint was better than, kind of the instability of what Rodgers was in New York. So I think it's just kind of a nature of the two players. I was this was me and Jake actually who got this done, and he's obviously a Giants fan. No, he's a Giants fan. He's a Giants fan. And what we really did was, he used this trade prior as a template, which is actually a really interesting way to do things. We talk about this all the time, cascading trades. This is a cascading trade where, one deal was seen and Jake saw some value in that. I saw some value in that on my end because I'm rebuilding. And this is a little bit more in terms of like what I would be wanting because, I'm both giving up a producer potentially and a pick next year to get a higher pick. Or I'm sorry, pick 2 years from now, third, to get a higher pick, a second round pick next year. And so I really like being able to do that. That does feel like kind of, the best case scenario for a trade like that, I would say.
Yeah. I like it.
Cool.
All right. DU5 had somebody reach out to me. They are the 8chan owner and was like, hey, I want my backup and Jalen Wright. Actually, I like Jalen Wright. I thought I'd see more of him last year just because he kind of fits what I imagine that offense likes, speed and mostly speed. So I was kind of excited about, Wright year 2. And so I wasn't looking to trade him, right? So a little bit of back and forth, and he came to me with the 26 second. And I'm like, I don't know how I could say no to that, right? Like, I think that is a pretty fair price for Jalen Wright. But I also, so tell me what you think about that.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, this is a guy you probably got in the 3rd round of last year's draft, turn it into a second. I'm
Something
good
like
with that. I think the ceiling is a little limited. I mean, he could have been a late second, but I'm pretty confident he was in the 3rd round.
I don't think so.
Most likely. Yeah. But I think his ceiling is slightly limited. I actually really did like Wright coming out. I think he's got a really good skill set, a lot of tools in the bag, but I think this is a pretty solid return for him. I don't know exactly what the state of your team is in DU5, but I would probably almost take this no matter what. So yeah,
it shouldn't be that bad. I just drafted it.
Yeah, no. I mean, you never know. You could have gone like productive struggle. I don't know.
No.
I don't remember. But okay, yeah. I mean, I dig it. Like, I think this is a good way to move on from Wright. He's more of a handcuff than anything anyway. So yes. Getting a 2nd round pick for that is pretty damn good.
Okay, so then I made another trade, maybe the same day or the next day, because I was trying to have what I had in Wright as the backup to the main running back, 2nd-year running back on offense I typically like. And I'm like, well, you know what? If I could do it again with Marshawn Lloyd, who's sitting behind Josh Jacobs, who just had a 300 rushing yard season, as we talked about. If I could get Marshawn Lloyd, who I think was drafted higher than Jalen Wright in the NFL, if I'm not mistaken, if I could get Marshawn Lloyd, who's in a very similar situation, maybe even slightly better, if I could get him for less than a 26 second, then I think I have, on the player side of things, I think I have pretty much moved laterally, maybe slightly more than lateral, but I'm doing it at a price less than what I got back for Wright, if that makes sense. So I did Marshawn Lloyd, and I sent over a 26 third and a 27 third for Marshawn Lloyd.
Yeah, I don't hate that. I am slightly surprised that you couldn't get it done just for, like a 3rd and a 4th, maybe. I'm obviously splitting some hairs here, but
I sent the 26 third and it got rejected.
So yeah, that's not surprising.
I sent the 27 third. So
yeah. I mean, I would have maybe gone with the 27 4th or a 26 4th if you had it there, just to test that before going to the 27 3rd. But I still think like the process kind of makes sense to me, moving Wright for a second, and you did get Lloyd for less than what you moved Wright for, 100%. So you did it. I just, I'm very frugal, so I would have definitely tried to play off of the Lloyd like injury stuff, and Josh Jacobs is the man. But I know that you like to just get shit done, and you did. And so again, I'm kind of quibbling here. So I'm sorry for continuing talking, but that's how I feel. So I do think it's a solid bet though that Lloyd has a potential resurgence, just because everything last year was like injury. It was a foot, an appendix. It was everything you could possibly imagine. It had really nothing to do with, on the field talent. So hopefully, for your sake, that pans out.
Cool.
And his sake.
All right. Last one I think is Jake's in DU5.
Yes.
He tried to hit me up with something similar to this. But as soon as I see he was trying to trade me Trey McBride, I just was like, nah, it's not going to work. He's trying to take advantage of me.
You love Trey McBride, take advantage of me.
He knows I love Trey McBride. But anyway, and I just wasn't, I think I was like splitting wood or something. I didn't wasn't paying attention too much. But hey, I'm done with wood chores for the rest
Lumberjack
of the year.
over here.
Yeah. Anyways, Jake traded away Trey McBride, and he got back Hawkinson, Kamara at 26 first, which he's his own first back that he had traded away a couple of days before in a different trade, which he didn't add to this one. Anyways, yeah, Hawkinson, Kamara, 26 first, and a 27 late second for Trey McBride. Yeah. I mean, I'm not surprised. Like, this is still not something I would do. I don't think. But we talked about, well, it must have been like 3-4 weeks ago. We're talking about JJ McCarthy and just the way that Jake was talking about how he feels about Hawkinson, I'm not surprised that he's probably valuing Hawkinson higher than this particular league average values him. So I feel like he's probably getting back a piece that he values higher than I do, I guess, just looking at this. I think at the end of the day, I think McBride clears.
Yeah, that's definitely a fair perspective on it. I actually wanted to grab, I meant to do this before, I want to grab TJ Hawkinson's like end of year stats. But, you're making a move from tight end 2 to basically tight end 7. I mean, we're kind of using KTC here, so that could change, depending on who you are. But basically going from tight end 2 to tight end 7, and you're getting back a 26 first that is going to likely be very high because he can control this. It's his own pick, so somewhere in the top 5 range, let's say, maybe even the top 3 potentially. So you're getting Hawk, that pick, 27 second, and Kamara, which I think if he can move between now and mid-season, he can get kind of maybe close to an extra first, probably a 2 seconds type deal done. And I think this league is a 0.75 premium, which is pretty significant. Hawk, I think, did have a pretty good season when he came back. 41 for 455 last year, averaging, 11 yards per catch, pretty solid for coming back off that injury. And then I know in the playoffs, he was, 5 for 5, 64 and a touchdown. So that was, I think, with McCarthy coming back, coming off of an injury, needing kind of a binky of sorts, right? A security blanket. I would not be surprised to see Hawkinson, perform really well. So I can see this working out, for Jake in terms of his ability to kind of flip assets over and over again. I think this is actually already a pretty good return. I think McBride, the difference between McBride and Hawkinson to me is at least a first and probably closer to 2 firsts, but like a first and a second. And he got a first and a second in Kamara basically on top of it. And one of them is going to be a really, really high pick. So you can't really, you can't beat him up for making that trade. And you can't kill the guy who got McBride either. It's a great asset. But yeah, I can see the vision.
Cool. Anything else you want to talk about?
No. I mean, I think that's it for right now. We've had a couple new members join the Discord, so shout out to them. Appreciate y'all.
Yes.
Keep checking the show description. There's a link in there you can join off of. Other than that, hopefully the data drops over the last couple of weeks were interesting to y'all, or at least fun for us to talk about. But that's all I got, man.
Cool. Follow the show on socials and join the Discord. Other than that, thanks for everybody that listens weekly and tunes in on YouTube. It still means quite a bit that actually people care what we have to say. It's just fun. So other than that, have a good night.
Have a good night, y'all.